Anyway, Matt, thanks for being here. God bless you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Matt, as you already know. And actually, normally, I'll introduce my family because we've just been back in the United States for a couple weeks, and the very first service we had was in Sierra Vista, quite a ways from here, and from Yuma, where my wife's from originally. And I did the whole service by myself, sharing about missions. I was really excited. And at the end, they said, "What about your family?" And I forgot to introduce, they didn't say anything about them. So I felt really bad about that. So my wife, her name is Sarah, and she's going to come up in just a little bit and tell you a little bit about Swaziland. And then we have 3 kids. Chloe is 10, Kate is 8, and William just turned 5. And then the newest one will be born at the end of October in Africa. So we've been missionaries for about almost 5 years. William, the boy, he was 4 or 5 months old when we moved to the southern part of Africa. So he doesn't really understand this whole what America is, and he doesn't realize that he's actually an American. So we're trying to help him understand certain things. The girls, they understand a little bit better, and I'm not sure what I am anymore. So, but Sarah is going to come up here and share with you just a little bit, and then you'll get to see me again in a few minutes. So that's something to look forward to.
Good morning. Is this okay? It's so great to be with you all this morning. I bring you greetings from the church in Swaziland. That's something that's customary in Africa, to bring each other greetings. And I really like that because it makes us feel more like we're family. And the really cool thing is, we are. The church, I was telling the girls this morning, they're like, "Oh, it's a new church," they're a little bit nervous. I said, "No, we're going to our church family in Chino Valley, just like we're with our church family in Swaziland, the Church of the Nazarene." So that's an exciting thing. And Matt says that I need to greet you in Siswati from them. So what they would say if they were here to you today is Sanibonani Bazuwani Egameni La Jesu, which just means I greet you, all of you, in the name of Jesus. Now don't think I know how to speak Siswati fluently. I don't yet. That's sad. It's a language with 3 clicks in it. And it's totally not anything like the English, but we're trying. So we are living and serving in Swaziland, and some people don't have a clue what that means. One person once told me, "Is that a real place? It sounds like Disneyland." I said, "No, it's a real place. It's in Africa." And Chloe, our 10-year-old, wanted you all to know, can you hear me? I feel like I have to stand on my tiptoes. Where Swaziland is, because Africa, but Africa's pretty big. You can go to the next slide, Matt. I think. Okay, there's Africa. You know where Africa is, I'm assuming. Okay, there it is, in reference to the U.S. and the rest of the world. You can go to the next slide, Matt. But Africa, we sometimes think Africa is kind of the size of the U.S. I used to think that. Maybe you don't. Because on the map, it's kind of similar on the big world map, and maybe they're the same size. But they are not. Africa is enormous. And there are 56 countries in Africa. 56 countries, if you count the island countries. That's a lot of countries. And sometimes it's easy to think of Africa maybe as one country. It's not. 56. And we are down in the bottom part of Africa. Go to the next one. In the southern part, in Swaziland, which is the little red circle. See, Chloe put some little arrows in there for you so you can see where we are. That is the country of Swaziland. It's just so tiny compared to Africa, compared to the U.S. But it's really influential in Nazarene missions, which Matt's going to share with you in a little bit. You can go to the next slide. Chloe wanted to get really specific and show you that we live in Manzini, Swaziland, right in the middle. And it's a teeny country. Matt also teaches over in Stegi. We didn't tell you what we do yet. We live and serve, obviously, in Swaziland. We work at the Southern Africa Nazarene University. That's a big name, which we call SANU. And we're helping to develop a chaplaincy program there for the university. And Matt is teaching in the Faculty of Theology, which is over there in that little place that looks like Saitegi, but they call it Stegi, where he teaches biblical languages and theology. So he's going to come and share with you a little bit more about missions in Swaziland.
Okay, so you know geographically where Swaziland is. It's a long way away, about 10,000 miles. Someone told me, one of the pastors at one of the churches we were at, I think just last week in Phoenix, that if you look on a globe, from Arizona to Swaziland, it's almost as far away from any as you can get on the globe from any 2 points before you start heading back around the other way. Which I'm not sure if that's supposed to reassure us or not. So we're a long way away. It takes generally, there's either a 16 or 17 hour flight that you can take just to get to Atlanta. But yeah, it's a long way away. So that's where we live. We are helping at a university and also training pastors. But before we really what we'd like to do this morning is to get you to think about missions. Now, a lot of people have an idea in their mind as to what missions really is, or what a missionary is. And probably a lot of what you think about when you hear the word missions or missionary probably has to do with how long you have been in the church. If you've been in the church a really long time, you probably think of the old days of mission, something that looks kind of like this. You see, this isn't Pioneer Days. I think that's a thing. What do they call it in Prescott? Okay, it's not a black and white photo on someone's iPhone of someone recreating that. This is the real thing, and it's not in the American West. It's in Swaziland. We got the donkey-drawn wagon and a guy with breeches and boots and a kind of a safari hat. Now, if you've been in the church a long time, a lot of people have this as their view of what missions is. Now, as cool as I think that is, I wish I had donkeys to pull something around, and I wish I had a hat like that. I've never actually done that. Okay? We're missionaries, but we don't actually do that. And what you're actually looking at there is a picture of a man named Harman Schmelzenbach. Has anyone ever heard that name before? A handful of people, okay. I got in trouble at, I think, Sierra Vista when I said, probably the older people know who Harman Schmelzenbach is, and they were very offended by that. The more mature amongst us know Harman Schmelzenbach. But if you're younger, I guess, I was told before the service I'm awfully young. I'm not sure what that means, but that's a good thing or a bad thing. But if you're maybe younger like me, you probably didn't grow up knowing that name, maybe. The reason maybe some of our more mature Nazarenes know that name is Harman Schmelzenbach was one of the first Nazarene missionaries. 110 years ago, almost to the day. I think it was May 9th or May 24th or something. My wife and I were reading one of the old missionary books that tell the story about how the Church of the Nazarene went to Africa. Just sometime in May of 1907, he boarded a ship in New York and sailed to the southern part of Africa. So about 110 years ago, the Nazarene missionaries went to this part of the world. And for a long time, for several generations in the Church of the Nazarene, that name, Schmelzenbach of Swaziland, meant a lot because he went there and literally in a place that had never heard the good news about Jesus, he carved out a place for the church to be. He won Swazi people to Christ. He discipled them. He began to train pastors. And that was how the Church of the Nazarene started in that part of the world. But the enduring legacy of a man like this, one of the real original missionaries, was that wherever Nazarenes were, his name and his legacy in that story was passed on. And so a lot of other people got really excited about missions. And as a result of that, many people sitting in churches just like this, people just like you, they heard the call of God saying, I want you to go somewhere else and serve me. Now today, it sounds sort of fancy. It's not. We call that serving cross-culturally. It simply means leaving the culture that you know and going somewhere else to share Jesus with those people. And so as the years went on, even from these days, many Nazarenes heard the call of God and went somewhere else to serve. And the church grew wherever they went. Many people, just like you, maybe they weren't called to go as a missionary, but they faithfully attended their church. They faithfully supported the pastor. They faithfully gave towards missions. And that allowed our church to go from North America and a few places back in 1907, the 1910s, the 1920s, so that today there's not a single place in the world. Now, there's some countries we haven't reached yet, but there's not a single area of the world that the Church of Nazarene has not spread to. So it's a wonderful story. If we had time, we could go into details of how God worked and some of the wonderful stories of those early days. But we, as missionaries from Swaziland, we stand on the shoulders. That's such a weird expression. I mean, I don't want anyone to stand on my shoulders. My kids try to do that if we go swimming, and it really hurts. But so to proverbially, we stand on the shoulders of those missionaries that have come before. It's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful legacy. But we participated, and you participated in it by being part of the Church of the Nazarene. So thank you for that. This is a picture of Nzingeni in Swaziland. This was one of the first places that the Church of the Nazarene, with people like Schmelzenbach, developed what they called the mission station or the mission compound. In the early days, the way that mission work was done, because it was a very harsh environment, it was there was wild animals everywhere. The people themselves, we could somewhat say, were a little bit wild as well. They had no concept of Western civilization or Christianity. They lived in a tribal culture. So in those early days, there was lots of crazy stuff that happened. And so it made sense that the work would go forward by people, missionaries, and the church people meeting in one place and kind of having a mission compound. So in Nzingeni, any of you that know the old stories, that was kind of where the work in Swaziland sprung up. And for a long time, it was centered there. And even today, this picture was taken just driving down the dirt road out in front of it. There's still a school there and a church there. The oldest Nazarene church in Swaziland is there. And so it's a point of history. This here is just maybe, I almost said kilometers, but no one uses kilometers here. Maybe a mile from our house, a little bit less. This is the first Nazarene church in Manzini, the town where we live. This is just down the road from our house. We're going back in time now. Anyways, that stone church, that shows you a transition then that began to happen over the years. What do missionaries do? Well, first and foremost, missionaries' job is to take the church where it is not yet. That's exactly what Schmelzenbach did. And here, even to this day, this is still standing. They're actually renovating it now. It looks a lot better than it does in that picture. That picture is, I think, from when we first moved to Swaziland. They're fixing it up now as a historical memory of a memorial, really, of the early days of the church. So they went and they started churches, places like this, places you would expect to see. But with the Church of the Nazarene, those early days, even up till today, in 2017, the Church of the Nazarene, we are passionate about telling people that don't know about Jesus, telling them the good news about Jesus. And that is normally done through starting churches, building churches, growing churches, training pastors. But the Church of the Nazarene also, even from the early days, was concerned to see that people's medical needs were being met as well. And if you can go back one picture, you can't. It's not a great picture, but just behind this stone church, one of the reasons we include it is the Nazarene Hospital that was started there, one of the earliest hospitals that was started in Swaziland as well. And the Church of the Nazarene was also very concerned, not just for the spiritual and physical needs of people, they wanted to be able to educate people and give them a chance to do something to improve the country as well. So just on the other side of the stone church, we really need a better picture. Maybe I'm not a very good photographer. Is part of the university that we are part of, and in that white building that you just can't see behind the tree, that's been the central point of the nursing college, which we now call the Faculty of Health Sciences. I think that started in 1937. It was the first institution of its kind in that part of the world, where the Swazi people had the opportunity to become trained as nurses. And so there's a wonderful history and legacy of not just starting the work in Swaziland, but seeing it develop in a multifaceted way. So the church grew. Schools were started. I think there's 43 Nazarene schools across the country of Swaziland, and now a university and clinics. There's almost nowhere you can go in the back roads of Swaziland where even before you see the church, you'll see a sign that says Nazarene Clinic. And I don't even know how many clinics there are. But that simply bears witness to the idea that when the Church of the Nazarene goes somewhere to tell people about Jesus, we don't just simply go and say, Jesus is a great guy, things will be great, and then see you later. The Church of Nazarene's strategy has always been to, yes, share the good news, but then help to change the society and culture where they find themselves with medical care and education as well. You can go forward one slide. So this is a picture from last year in a rural part of Swaziland where people just like you, they were from Florida. I'm not sure if Arizonans claim Floridians. I'm a Floridian. A work and witness team from Florida came to Swaziland. And here they are seen helping to build a church. Now again, this is maybe the mindset, the mental picture we have of what missions is in 2017. And it is. Stuff like this happens all over the world. I don't even know how many work and witness teams from the United States, from North America, go around the world and do things like this. But this isn't all missions is, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, the changing face of missions. But before we move on, I just have to tell a little bit of a story here. This looks, now most of us would probably look at that and say, wow, that's a church being built in Africa. Wow, look at they're doing everything by hand and they don't have tools or whatever. I don't know. Whatever comes to your mind. But I wish, if we had a panoramic photo of this, I wish we could pan just a little bit to the left, because this is a church that is very young, very new. It's in the middle of nowhere, even by Swazi standards, okay? In fact, my oldest daughter, one day we were driving to this work site, and we actually had to send her outside of the car to wake up a goat that was sleeping in the middle of the road. That's how, so when you're getting sleeping goats out of the road, there's not a lot of traffic. So it's way out there, but it started out just a few years ago. It was what they called a preaching point. And a preaching point, as best I can tell, I'm not sure what the official definition is basically when an established church says, we're going to send someone out here where there's basically nothing, and they're just going to start preaching. And I'm going to try to get a few people to come in, okay? So this former student of mine, a student that I taught back in 2012, it's a lady, a Swazi lady. She was assigned to this preaching point out in but they call it the forest, but it's like a couple little scrubby trees. It's not a forest like the national forest you drive through up here. And how far was she walking, Sarah? It's 2 hours one way from her house to this place. Not to pastor church, but to preach at a preaching point. Well, she was faithful, and God blessed, and they went from just a small little group of people to having a much larger group of people, and they needed a place to worship. Now, you're probably thinking, well, that's why they're building the church. It is, except there's an intermediary step there. They built their first church. The first church was logs, and that's insulting North American logs. It's not like these log cabins you see up here. They were basically just sticks, they weren't really logs, propped up, and then corrugated sheet metal wrapped around, and they just threw another layer of that across the top. It was like this tin metal box, probably you could fit the chairs and the tables inside of it. And it's probably about that long. And they were packing, I think, 60 to 80 people each Sunday into that metal box. Now, it looks like something you'd put meat in to cook for Thanksgiving or something. I mean, it was hot. And they packed people in there. And so the church was growing, God was blessing, but they didn't have a place. So many other things happened, but in steps people just like you that now are working alongside of the people there. In fact, most of the people in the picture are men from the church that are helping to lay the cinder blocks. And so there's a collaboration, a working together of the Swazi church moving outside of their metal shed And if you've got a metal storage shed, again, it's probably an insult to your metal storage shed, to build the church. Now, we understand and we love that idea of missions. And that is missions. It's a very important part of missions. But that's not all missions is. This is a picture of William. He's up there because he's cute. He's a hardworking little dude. I'm not sure, was he pulling weeds or breaking? He's doing something. Anyways. So, again, a picture that we would expect to see of missions. But that's not all missions is. And so, as I've been a missionary now for almost 5 years, I struggle, as maybe you do, with this concept of what we think missions was and what it is now. And especially the longer you've been in the church, we have these ideas that are built up. Well, a missionary does A, B, and C, but not D, E, and F, or whatever. And even I'm standing here as a missionary this morning, and I struggle with this idea because sometimes we come back and we share about what we're doing in Swaziland, and it happened in Prescott this morning. 3 or 4 people. Well, do you know so-and-so? They were a missionary in Swaziland. And then by the time we work out like what year they were there, well, I think I was going in the kindergarten that year. So I'm a missionary to Swaziland, but I struggle even myself with this idea of, well, what missions was like then and what it's like now. So we've already talked about how there's some similarities, but I want to challenge your thinking and mine this morning to say, well, what is missions now? We already talked a little bit. Now I feel like I'm lecturing and not sharing about missions, but we talked about the early days of pioneer missions. That's great. Get some of those old mission books. They're great. They're exciting reading. You know, we think we have to have John Grisham or something on TV to be exciting. You read those early mission books. They should make movies out of that sort of stuff. It's really cool stuff. There's a picture in our university of Schmelzenbach and the other missionaries with these huge old rifles, like sitting on top of lions and antelope, and all they were doing, they had gone out to shoot animals for the camp meeting because they had to provide food. I wish I got to do stuff like that, but that doesn't happen quite the same way anymore. So there's really exciting stuff from our past, and that's something we should be grateful for, but we shouldn't put it up on a pedestal alone and say, well, if that's missions, then nothing else is. Another thing that happened after those days of Schmelzenbach was that idea of strategic development. And our church did a great job of that. I talked a little bit about the things that have come about as a result of those very intentional ways of developing the church in places like Swaziland. But that strategic development hit a bump in the road, so to speak. That's that's an American metaphor, not a Swazi metaphor, because you can't drive anywhere without hitting a bump in the road in Swaziland. They were just like, what's a bump in the road? I mean, we're just driving along. But there was a turning point, a watershed moment in Nazarene missions, in Africa at least, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, where they began to look and say, God has led us to this point, and we've seen the work grow in places like South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Swaziland, the southern countries. But then they began to look at that rest of that map that Sarah showed you, and they said, we don't have hardly any converts or influence or people that we've reached in the rest of Africa. And Africa is a really big place. So they looked at that and said, we're going to make a strategic decision. We're going to take the missionaries out of the places they've always been and send them across the continent. Now, we could talk for hours, and you would all fall asleep as I tried to describe it, the missiological impact that had on the places where missionaries had been. But I'm not here to just simply talk about that. What did happen, though, from that decision, and for the people in southern Africa, the southern parts of Africa, it was a little bit of a controversial decision because suddenly they'd had missionaries for 70, 80 years, and now they're all gone. But for the rest of Africa, it led to explosive growth. So much so that the church is now growing at such a fast rate that we can't even train pastors fast enough to keep up with the demand for new places that the gospel is going in Africa. So in the long term, the strategic development to send the missionaries all across Africa has led to explosive growth. So much so, the Church of Nazarene started not too far from here, over in California. Some of you maybe know that history. I'm not going to be a good Nazarene now. I believe it was 1908. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Came together.
When they came together. Yeah, right. Okay. Some of the early Nazarenes were from right over here in California, and so we think of the home of the church being North America, or the United States specifically. But as of this year, there are more Nazarenes in Africa than there are in North America. And the rate at which the church is growing there, we are hoping, our goal in Africa is to see that there will be 1 million Nazarenes by the year 2020. And even beyond that, some people have even set higher goals. And so with that growth that we see all across Africa, I think we're now in 43 or 44. We don't claim some of the being in some of the countries that are dominated by Islamic regimes, but we do have Nazarene missionaries in those places. They're just secret agents for the Lord, so to speak. So most of the continent has been reached, and the passion of Africa is that not just that we enter new countries, but that people come to Christ in places where they've never come to Christ before. And in Africa, that's primarily North Africa. Countries like Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, and Tunisia, and so on. And so the growth is tremendous, but now the church in Africa is saying, our idea, similar to the North American idea, of what a missionary is someone that normally is white, that comes from Europe or North America, and serves in a different part of the world. And if you ask someone from Africa, what is a missionary? That's basically the definition they will give you. Okay? But this new era, as we've seen this explosive growth in our church, we are now seeing that a missionary is anyone that responds to serve cross-culturally. In fact, many of our Nazarene missionaries in Africa are Africans. The leader of the church in Africa is from Mozambique. Even one of our elected general superintendents for the entire global church, it was born and raised in Africa. And so we truly are a global church, but this new era that we're living in, it's not just about people like us, people from the places we're from, going somewhere else, although that's exactly what we've done. Missions now is anyone that responds to the call of God and says, I will leave my culture, my context. I will leave where I'm comfortable and I'll go somewhere else and share the gospel. We had the privilege of meeting just at the beginning of this year, back in January, a couple, an older couple, a more mature couple from Burkina Faso, which is in West Africa. He was the district superintendent of his district, a wonderful leader in the church. But God called him and his wife and said, you're living here, doing a great thing for me. There's nothing wrong with being a district superintendent, although I've heard some people that might disagree with that. You're doing a great work for the church, being a leader in Burkina Faso. But what about the neighboring country of Mali, where less than 5% of the people, over 95% of the people in Mali are Muslim. And it's illegal to share about Jesus in Mali. And this man, he heard the call, and what did he do? He left Burkina Faso, he went to Mali, and now they're serving there, spreading the good news about Jesus in a place where there was almost no Christian witness before. I could tell you story after story of African Nazarenes who are hearing that call and going. So we have a wonderful history. We have a wonderful tradition in our church of what it means to be a missionary. And that still exists, primarily because of people just like you, in churches just like this, doing what you do on a week in and week out basis. So thank you for that. But also, we need to open our minds a little bit and realize a missionary isn't just someone from the United States. It isn't just someone from Europe, but it can be someone from any country of the world that leaves where they're comfortable and then goes somewhere else. Now, I've been trying everywhere we go to get this idea across, but sometimes we tend to be very slow learners, and I'm probably the worst about that. But one of the things that I've picked up on when we get to share about missions is that we tend to think as North Americans that it's a great sacrifice for one of us to go somewhere that has less than what we have here. We talk about, well, man, I sure miss Burger King. Or, I sure miss Walmart, or whatever it is you think you would miss. The big one is air conditioning. I sure miss air conditioning. And to be honest, there's lots of times that I miss air conditioning in Swaziland. Anyways, we tend to think, well, yeah, it's something for a North American to go somewhere else. But if an African goes from Burkina Faso to Mali, well, it's still Africa, right? They aren't sacrificing anything. I'm here to tell you that it's just, if not more so, difficult for a Swazi to leave everything they know and go to another culture. We tend to, because we don't want to be uncomfortable, we tend to think that the great sacrifice of missions is giving things up. But the reality is, it's leaving behind what you know to be comfortable. And a Swazi person, they don't know what it's like to live in Chino Valley. They don't know what it's like to live in America, but they still love the place that they've come from. Their whole culture is built around staying on the family farm, or the homestead as they call it, and never going anywhere else. In fact, they think it's crazy when they ask me as an American, where's your home in America? I don't have one. I don't have a place to call home in America. This is my home. Oh, so you're a Swazi now? Well, no, I'm still an American. And then we'll have this conversation. But how can you be an American if you don't have a home in America? So, well, I have a hometown, but my parents moved away. They did what? Because in Swaziland, your home is where you're from, and no one ever leaves it. If you go to the city to get a job, your home is still where you came from. So we can sit there and say, well, but Swaziland doesn't have Burger King, and we don't, unfortunately. We do have KFC. We have a lot of KFCs. I don't know why. That's the only American restaurant we have. We have 6 of them in a country the size of like Rhode Island. But we sit here and think, well, Swazis don't have to give up anything to go. But they have to give up what they know and what they're comfortable with and go. So never fall into this trap that I often think, well, if a North American goes to be a missionary, it's something. But if African does it, somehow it's not really missions. No, this is the new era of missions in the Church of the Nazarene. And it's wonderful to see what God is doing. So, we're here to represent global missions to you today, and hopefully share some things you didn't know before, but also get you excited about what God's doing around the world. Now, whenever we share about missions, almost every service, someone will come up afterwards, shake my hand, thank you for sharing with us, that's great, it's nice to meet you, and then they'll get this look in their eye, and they normally won't look right at me, they'll look over my head somewhere and say, back when I was 14, God called me to be a missionary, but I never went. Now, I never know what to say at that point. I'm just like, do I give them a hug, or but then they'll say, well, I'm glad that you went, or something like that. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the reality is, we tend to think that if you go to be a missionary, you're involved in missions. And then if you stay in Chino Valley, you aren't involved in missions. And that's a lie from the devil. You don't have to actually become a missionary like us to be involved in missions. In fact, I would say most of the hard work to be done is right here. The early days we talked about of Schmelzenbach. Over and over again in those stories. Now, we remember the name Schmelzenbach. We have the picture of him. If you go to the headquarters in Kansas City, they even little postcards of him. I think there might be one on our table, okay? But behind that man and his family, there were hundreds, if not thousands of people in churches just like this that prayed and gave sacrificially. And they were the ones that actually made the whole thing go. But as we travel around today, I think maybe it's our culture. We like hero worship. Everyone knows LeBron James or Steph Curry or something like that. But very few people know the 6th and 7th and 8th people that come into the game, right? We just want to know who the star is. And missionaries certainly aren't stars. But we fall into that same thinking in the church. Well, who's the pastor? Who's the district superintendent? And we forget that every one of us has an important part to play. And if we, as a collective congregation, as we as a corporate church, do not play that part, then missions can't go forward. In Chino Valley, in Arizona, in Swaziland, in Morocco, any other place in the world. So what you are doing is the most important thing. By praying. And I can guarantee you this. The more you pray and get involved in caring about missions, not just us, but the whole big picture, the more that God will begin to move in your life and open up doors for things that you can be doing right where you're at. I've never met a person that wasn't passionate about missions in a local church like this, if they're passionate about missions, that God wasn't constantly bringing people and situations into their own life for them to be a blessing, for them to be the hands of the church, the hands of Christ, the feet of Christ, where they're at. So if you want to be involved in missions, I would simply say, get excited about what God's doing around the world so that He can open up new doors and new opportunities for you right where you're at. And when we do that, when there's that reciprocal two-way street between being concerned about what's happening at the ends of the earth and what's happening right here where we're at, that's when we truly are what Jesus wants us to be. That's when we are living out what it means to be like Jesus, to be Christ-like, to live a life of holiness, as our church says. So, that's my challenge to you this morning. God is working around the world, but He's also working right here in Chino Valley. So as you remember what God's doing around the world, please pray for us. But also, open up your hearts and minds to what God might have for you to do right here. Just to leave you with some closing prayer concerns. Something that we are so desperate for and Africa needs more than anything is to see the spread of the gospel, but also the spread of biblical truth. Whenever there's a great revival or a great spreading of God's word around the world, many people come to Christ, and that's what we're seeing in Africa. People are coming to Christ very quickly. But coming in right behind is the plans of the enemy. To pull people, as soon as they come into the church, to pull them off to other teachings, other things that really, it's not the gospel at all. And when we say it means it's not good news at all. When we say it's not the gospel, it's not good news. And we see that in Africa. So pray that as the gospel spreads across Africa and around the world, from African missionaries, that it will spread, but the biblical truth about Jesus will also spread. Pray with us in Africa for Vision 2020, which is something our African leadership has put forward as several very lofty goals that they would like to see the church reach by that year. And as of right now, we're on track to meet them. If you think of us, and we have a little bookmark, a prayer card, you can keep it in your Bible, or hopefully you read your Bible, but if you don't read your Bible, you can keep it in your place in another book as well. But it's better in your Bible. I think we have those on a table outside. If you see that card, just praying for us is so meaningful. And I can honestly say we would not have remained on the mission field if it wasn't for people praying for us. Every time we've had a major challenge or something that maybe even threatened our safety, the reality or even a simple email from someone that we maybe only met once said, I prayed for you this morning, was enough to realize that God still had His hand of protection upon us and that people, just like you, were lifting up missionaries in prayer. And lastly, what I've just challenged you about, this is a prayer for you as it is for me and for anyone in North America, as it is in Africa. Pray that every Christian would be participating in the Great Commission. The Great Commission is simply the words that Jesus left. My favorite version of it is in Matthew 28, 18 through 20, which says, Then Jesus came to them and said, All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And lo, I'm with you even to the end of the age. That's the Great Commission, is Jesus' command to us as Christians to make disciples. That's the command, make disciples. But we fall into that trap that I've just been talking about, that certain people, pastors, missionaries, Sunday school teachers, they're the ones that do the Great Commission. But that's not true. The Great Commission is for all of us. So pray for Africa. The African Christians will be participating in the Great Commission. But as you pray it, pray that prayer for yourself. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Sometimes you think we have to say these and nows and stuff for a prayer to be official. At least that's how I think. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just pray this prayer. I challenge you for a week in a row. Simply say, Jesus, how can I be involved in the Great Commission? If you pray that, I guarantee you that He will begin to show you and speak to you in ways that you can be used by Jesus to bring about His kingdom upon earth. Thank you very much for being here this morning, for your support of this church. When you support this church, you're supporting Nazarene Global Mission. And everything from Schmelzenbach up until the Marshalls in Swaziland today is dependent upon your prayers, your support, and what you're doing. So thank you very much for that, and may God richly bless you.